Hi, I'm Jilly G. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to show you how to make my taco soup. Gluten-free, of course. This recipe is in my cookbook. And there's actually two recipes in my cookbook today that I'll be using. So my taco soup is right here, and then the taco seasoning that I use in my taco soup and my taco salad that is here on my channel is right here. And so usually when I make this taco seasoning, I'll make a really large batch of it and then I store it in a jar. This time of year, I always like to start using things that I preserved last year. So today I'll be using a lot of freeze-dried ingredients. And I'm also kind of challenging myself a little bit. I know this time of year, there are a lot of challenges on YouTube. And I'm not invited to be part of that challenge, but I thought I would challenge myself. And it's kind of a pantry challenge or whatever, whatever you made last year, use it. So I thought I'm going to challenge myself and see what ingredients I have and what ingredients I've preserved and make a delicious dinner. So taco soup is what I came up with. So I do have some freeze-dried cooked ground beef. I've got red and green bell peppers. Although my taco soup recipe does not call for these, I thought I'd add them in this time. I've got freeze-dried onions. I've got freeze-dried chicken stock, tomatoes. I do have freeze-dried pinto beans. And then my ingredients that are not freeze-dried. I do have 1 can of black beans that I've rinsed and drained. I've got 2 cups of frozen corn. I've got a 7-ounce can of green chilies, my taco seasoning. This is garlic from the fridge. I've mentioned before, I know a lot of people don't like to use that, but it's so handy if you find yourself without fresh garlic or you don't want to take the time and effort to cut up fresh garlic. There you go. And then even though I've got essentially 4 cups of chicken stock here, I will need a little bit more. And I've mentioned this brand of bouillon cubes before. They are gluten-free. This is beef flavor, and this was also in my pantry. So all of these things I didn't even have to go to the store for. And I love taco soup. So the first thing I want to do is get all of my freeze-dried things rehydrated or reconstituted. So here are my peppers, and then all of these have oxygen absorbers that I will throw away. And man, I'll tell you, those are delicious. I could eat those like potato chips. Used lids, they're maybe not good for canning anymore, but they're really good for sealing jars with freeze-dried things. And I do have an oxygen absorber in here. Did you hear that seal? I have 2 in there. That was interesting. There's my onions. Now I could just throw all of these ingredients in my large stock pot, dump in a bunch of water until they reconstitute, but I actually want to saute my onions and my peppers first. So I'm going to use just this jar and I'm going to rehydrate or reconstitute. I'm never sure what the proper terminology is for this. And I really like to use these shallow bowls, so I don't add in too much water. I don't think I put enough. And it's the most interesting thing. Just this little bit of water that I'm pouring on, they smell just like fresh peppers and just like a fresh onion. Curious if the onion will make me cry, but I'm not cutting it up. It's already cut up. And for this recipe, if I add in a little bit too much extra water, it's not a big deal at all. So I'm going to set aside my onions and my peppers. And now for my ground beef. And this is cooked ground beef. I've been so excited and so happy with my freeze dryer. And I'll tell you, cooked meat, it has been one of the most amazing things. And look at that. It's super dry and crispy, and this big chunk here, I can still break it apart. And this is more ground beef than what I would normally use for this recipe, but that's okay. I need a little bit more water, but I'm just going to get started here. And again, once the water hits it, it smells just like cooked hamburger. It's so interesting. And you can see that I do have water here in the bottom. So I'm just stirring it all around, and then I'll let this sit. And I think I'm actually going to add just a little bit more water. And as you can see, I'm using the same spoon. I don't know that I showed you how to freeze dry ground beef. I don't remember. But when you freeze dry ground beef, you cook it and then you rinse it really, really well in hot water and try to remove all the grease that you possibly can. And so because I've done that and it freeze dried so well, I do have some olive oil over here to saute my vegetables. If this was fresh ground beef, I would cook that first and then with the grease from that, just saute those. So now for my tomatoes. And these are raw sliced tomatoes. This is so interesting. My tomatoes have turned yellow. I assure you, these were bright red. And you know, the interesting thing is I've actually heard that this has happened. Now that I've dumped them all into my bowl, I'm just going to break these apart so when they rehydrate, they'll kind of be in chunks already. I'm going to have to Google this and see about yellowing tomatoes. I've heard that carrots will turn white, which I've not experienced. I have freeze-dried carrots and they're still orange. And I put them in a mason jar so I can see them. But all of my tomatoes are in Mylar bags. So interesting. Even though freeze drying can preserve food for many, many years, I do like to occasionally go through and use it. First of all, because that's what I made it for, is to use it, but also to make sure that things are sealing well and that things are staying dry. So there is my 2 bags of tomatoes, and I'm going to pour in quite a bit more water than I think I need. And I expected that they would shrink down because this recipe normally calls for canned tomatoes that have liquid. I want these to have a little bit of extra liquid for that. I'm going to use my same spoon here. Now, if you're doing this in your own kitchen, if you have freeze-dried food, you probably won't use this many bowls to rehydrate everything. But I'm doing it to show you, and I'm also doing it partly for me, to see what everything looks like. I think my onions are coming along nicely, and you know, my peppers are still crunchy. This is a really good experiment because if you're camping or backpacking, if you already kind of have an idea of the ingredients that you want to take along with you, then you'll know that you'll need extra water. And then you'll kind of have an idea of how much these things take to rehydrate or reconstitute, which I'm not even measuring the water. So don't listen to me. So I think my onions are good. My tomatoes are soupy. My ground beef, it has absorbed all of that liquid and it looks just like ground beef because it is. So now I've got 2 cups of cooked pinto beans. Now the recipe in my cookbook, it calls for black beans and kidney beans, I think. Let me look. Yep, black beans and kidney beans. But I use different beans every time I make this. Just to change it up a little bit. Just to add some variety, whatever. Now, one thing about freeze-dried beans, you have to cook them first. But when they freeze-dry, their skins kind of come off. And I don't care. And because I've got an amount written on here that it is 2 cups of cooked pinto beans, I'm going to start with exactly 2 cups of water. Use my same spoon. Now, if I were going to make a meal like this for backpacking, I would make the soup first. And then I would freeze dry the soup and then package it in some kind of Mylar bag. And then when I'm backpacking, you just add hot water. Hopefully your bag has a reclosable seal. And then you just put your hot water in there and then let it all reconstitute and heat up at the same time. Now, I've got my 2 cups of chicken stock here. Now, chicken stock was a really interesting thing to freeze dry. It turns into the fluffiest kind of styrofoam ever. It's really interesting. Let me fish out my oxygen absorbers. And then I do have an exact measurement for my chicken stock. I've got 2 cups of chicken stock in each bag. So that is 4 cups of water total. Hopefully you can see that. It's such an interesting texture. And this is where you could powder this down and make your own bouillon. So I'm going to take this over to the sink and add 4 cups of water. And it's so interesting, it kind of floats on the top here. So I'm going to give this a chance to reconstitute as well. Give my beans a stir here. Check on my peppers here. And it's kind of turning into mush for my tomatoes, but there's still some chunks in here. I don't mind. Again, I'm making soup. And check on my onions. My onions and my peppers are looking really good. And if there's a little bit of extra water in here, it's okay. I may or may not use my beef bouillon. My taco soup recipe, it only calls for 3 cups of stock. I've got 4, but again, I am using freeze-dried ingredients, so it's okay if there's a little bit of extra liquid. Now for my taco seasoning. For this recipe, it is 1 recipe of my taco seasoning. And if you make a large batch like this, it's 2.5 tablespoons of the seasoning mix. And because I've got a little bit more ground beef than I would if it was just 1 pound and extra ingredients, I'm going to go about 3 tablespoons of my taco seasoning. And even though I'm using diced green chilies today, you could throw in a can of diced jalapenos, make this an extra spicy taco soup. So now I'm going to get started sauteing my vegetables first. Bring everything closer. I'm going to turn on my stock pot about medium heat. Dump in, this is probably 2 or so tablespoons of olive oil. Now that my olive oil is hot, I'm going to add in my onions and peppers. And you can see that I did have some extra water in here, and that's just fine. I expect that these will take a little bit longer to saute just because they do have a little extra water in them. And you can see that all of the liquid is absorbed and now they are starting to saute. Besides the texture being a little bit soggy, I guess is the way to describe it, they seem to be sauteing really well and they smell really good. Once they look like this, where they've got a little bit of color on them, I'm going to add in my garlic, give that a good stir, and then stir in all of my ground beef. And my taco seasoning, add in my green chilies, my pinto beans, my black beans, and my corn. And here we go with my tomatoes and their liquid. It really smells delicious. There goes my 4 cups of chicken stock. Such a colorful soup. And you know, I was thinking I may or may not add a little bit more water to this, but I think it's looking really good. If you like a thinner taco soup, add a little bit more liquid. If you like a thicker taco soup, add less liquid. Now that this is almost up to a boil, I am going to turn it down to a simmer and then put the lid on. My soup has been simmering for about, 20 minutes or so. It really doesn't take very long at all. This is such a fast and easy weeknight dinner. It sure looks good. Now I like to serve mine with a little bit of sour cream and some shredded pepper jack cheese. You can use whatever kind of cheese you like. And I like to stir it in. Let's give it a bite. I'm trying to get a little bit of everything in here. That is so good. And you know, I'm still so impressed with the ground beef. Freeze-dried ground beef, it retains all of its texture and flavor. It really is delicious. And my pinto beans, even though some of them are kind of, a little smashed, but the ones that aren't smashed, they really are holding their shape nice. My peppers and my onions taste delicious. And even though my tomatoes were a little bit different of a color, and they kind of dissolved into this soup, it still has really good flavor. You can taste the tomatoes in there. And I have just the right amount of taco seasoning in here. It really is coming through, and it's a delicious taco soup. You don't have to have a freeze dryer to make this taco soup. It's in my cookbook. Maybe you've already made it. It really is such a delicious soup for winter. All the flavors of a taco in a soup. If you are interested in purchasing a freeze dryer, my link is in the description box below. It doesn't cost you anything extra to use my link, but it does earn me a small commission that helps bring you more freeze drying videos. And even though this wasn't actually a freeze drying video, it is a video and a recipe using things that I have freeze dried. And wouldn't this be a delicious soup if you are camping or backpacking? Let me know what you think if you make this recipe. But thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have any questions or comments, let me know, and I'll see you on the next one.